How's it going, everybody? Matt here. Thanks so much for checking out this video. Your support really does mean a lot. Now, if you haven't noticed, I have been away for a couple of months. Life just got busy. Life, that tends to happen. I wanted to jump back into this channel, and yes, I have seen a lot of movies that I want to talk about, but I thought, what better way to jump back into this channel than to talk about my most anticipated film of 2025, and that is Fantastic Four: First Steps. If you're like me, and you really keep up with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, then you know that this film was announced years ago. And not only that, but this is the third reboot of the Fantastic Four. So this was announced 2019, 2020, somewhere in that area at an investors call. And since then, through different Comic-Con panels, we've been able to get little bits and pieces about what this project was going to be. And with each update that we were getting, I was only getting more and more excited. And originally this was going to be a John Watts project, which John Watts, he directed the newest Spider-Man trilogy. And obviously those films were critically and financially very successful. No Way Home, for example, that film, even post-pandemic numbers, was able to hit almost $2 billion at the box office. And really one of very few films since Endgame that has hit the 1 billion mark for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And since then, Matt Shakman came into the project, and Matt Shakman was one of the creative heads on WandaVision, so you know that he was incorporated with the universe. And with this switch, I was still excited about the movie. I'm not as familiar with Matt Shakman's work, but I was still excited about what Matt Shakman was going to do with the universe. And with each and every update we were getting, I was only getting more excited. Now, obviously, that comes with the cast of the film: Pedro Pascal, Vanessa Kirby, Ebon Moss-Bachrach, and Joseph Quinn. And one of my favorite additions to the crew list was actually Michael Giacchino, film composer Michael Giacchino. And that man's resume is just impeccable. Now, if you look at his resume, he's done The Incredibles, he's done Rogue One, he's actually done the Spider-Man trilogy, and a number of other films. Ratatouille, Up. He has a very, very wide resume. So when he was coming on, I was like, I really hope he brings some of that taste that he brought from The Incredibles to Fantastic Four, because obviously The Incredibles was very heavily influenced by the Fantastic Four. One of the other things that really was sticking out to me was the fact that this was going to be actually set in a different universe, in a different timeline than the main MCU that we're used to, which that I will talk about that later on in the video. But I also would just want to note that I absolutely love retro futurism. I can't really name a lot of projects that really stick out to compare it to, other than, something like the Jetsons, or if you're familiar with Tomorrowland at Disneyland and Disney World. That is essentially what we're looking at when we say, retro futurism. There were some press screenings last week, and there was a lot riding on this film up until this point. And a couple of the reasons being is because lately Marvel films, at one point Marvel was like the juggernaut of the film industry. When a new Marvel film was coming out, it was like an event. People were, opening night, opening weekend, the theaters were packed. And weeks to come, theaters were packed. Up until that point when Endgame hit. And since then, when we started entering into the multiverse saga, it's not that everything just started plummeting, but there was a lot of focus on quantity over quality, and we started going into a bunch of different narratives with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And recently, in the last couple years, in the last 2 to 3 years, they started focusing on a single narrative, and now you guys all know that all this is heading into the next two Avengers films, Doomsday and Secret Wars, which I'm very, very, very excited about, especially with the Russo brothers helming them. But we are starting to head more into that direction now. Now we have, more of a clear idea of what we're going to be expecting and experiencing. So recently, since Endgame, like I was saying, there have been some hits and misses with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So one of the reasons why there was a lot riding on Fantastic Four was for that reason. This is one of the last few films before we hit the Avengers films, before we hit the climax of the multiverse saga. So these films really, really have to measure up into the culmination of this multiverse saga. But on top of that, this is also the third reboot that we've had of Fantastic Four in the last 20 years. So obviously we had one in 2005, we had one in 2015, and now in 2025, this is our third iteration of this team, and with a whole new cast of characters. And I gotta say, last week reviews, first reactions started coming out and they were glowing. Everyone was so positive about this movie, which only made me more excited. I was like, okay, finally, we're starting to hit a great stride with the Marvel Cinematic Universe again. And coming off of Thunderbolts, not a lot of people saw Thunderbolts, but that movie was incredible. I'll do another review on it later. But that was, the first stepping stone of fans starting to come back into the Marvel Cinematic Universe and say, okay, this is something for us to be excited about. So all that to say, so now let's go ahead and talk about Fantastic Four. It finally opened, and I gotta say, I'm not gonna be the guy to constantly say that this film is fantastic. At least I'm not gonna try to, but I have to say that this is easily in the top 10 for me of my favorite Marvel Cinematic Universe movies. Now, I want to make a comparison here, and I'm not saying, I love Superman. I think what James Gunn is doing with the DC Universe is going to be awesome. But a film like Superman, for example, I had to say, I need to see it a second time before I could say I love it. But with Fantastic Four, I was able to go out first viewing saying, I love this movie. And right from the start, it jumps right into the character work. I'm not going to really give spoilers or, talk too much about plot details. But as you may know, the film is really ultimately about Sue Storm and Reed Richards, who they're portrayed by Vanessa Kirby and Pedro Pascal, and they're expecting their first child. But on top of that, there's a new threat coming to their universe, and that threat, Galactus, is saying, I want your child, and I will spare your Earth. So there is a conflict there, but, the film immediately jumps into that, and it jumps into us immediately just relating to these characters on a human level, and immediately just starting out with seeing what their struggles are. And that is, to me, that is such a great way of just immediately jumping in with these characters. And I thought, for the longest time, this film was just going to start out with a big action sequence. I thought, okay, this is going to start out because we've never been into this universe. We don't know much about it. No, it starts out with something so simple to get us to relate to these characters in such a meaningful way. And then it explores the universe as a whole, and it explores the other characters. And, of course, this is the third iteration, so that means this is not necessarily an origin story. But after that opening scene, we do get a little bit of a montage of the characters and their backgrounds and who they are and where they came from and why they have these powers. And they don't spend a lot of time with it. And that is one of the things about this film that I do love, but also I feel like I disliked about it. Now, to talk about why I loved it so much, because to me, this feels like there's no, is what people may say, there's not a lot of fat on this film. It's very trimmed down. It gets from one place to the other. It doesn't waste time on talking about plot points, but it just go, go, go. And one of the reasons I love that is because you're not stuck on a plot line that you don't have to be stuck on for too long. There's a reason why I feel like sometimes that could hurt the film, and that is because you don't get enough time with the characters, which is somewhat of a flaw of this movie. So for me, we got to jump into these characters, we got to meet them, but also it doesn't take a lot of time to develop these characters as well. So even though I do love the trimmed down version of this movie where you go, 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 I also wish we would have had a little bit more time to explore some of the development with these characters. Another thing that I wanted to address, and this is something that, for whatever reason, ever since Captain America First Avenger, I've really thought that the Fantastic Four were meant to be in the 60s. And if you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, there's a little Easter egg in Captain America First Avenger where you actually see the retro Human Torch outfit. It's not the one in this movie, but it's one that is shown, it's a comic accurate outfit or something. I'm not too familiar with the comic books, but that is something that they kind of show in the First Avenger. And for me, I would have really loved to just see a Fantastic Four movie set in that era, and that is something that I've always wanted. So when they said, yeah, we're going to actually set the film in that era, I was even more excited. And for them to be able to move it away out of a universe that is not the main Marvel Cinematic Universe, I feel like gave them a lot of flexibility to be able to explore, because they're the only heroes in this universe. You don't have to worry about, I don't want to call it the burden or baggage, but there's a lot of weight when you have to worry about, oh, what's Iron Man doing in this universe, or Captain America, or Spider-Man. It's no, you could focus solely on this universe and make it its own unique special place. And that's something I loved about it. But I absolutely love the set design in this movie, and you could feel all the love and passion that went into these sets. Now, this film is so different than other Marvel films because you could see a lot of it was built practically. The Times Square set, a lot of the Baxter Building sets, a lot of that was practical. And I found out like a week ago that they actually use miniature models, which is not necessarily a common thing in like big budget blockbusters these days. So that was cool to be able to feel that this stuff was real. The stuff you're looking at was practical. And it doesn't go without saying, you know, the visual effects in this movie were great. The very first shot of Julia Gardner's Silver Surfer character was incredible. I think it's possibly the best VFX shot in the entire film. The very first time that they reveal her face, and it does I think the camera goes, like, does a pan around her, and you just see all this detail, and it just looks absolutely incredible. Now, that goes without saying, I think sometimes throughout the movie, the visual effects don't hold up like it does in other parts of the movie. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but you could definitely tell, because when you're doing so well with practical effects and then you start mixing in visual effects and CG, when those things start to mix, you could definitely tell more of what is fake. And, you know, it's not the worst visual effects that I've seen in a Marvel movie, but it's noticeable. Overall, the CG was pretty good. I'd like to say, you know, I love the aesthetic. I love the retrofuturism feel that they're going for it. But one of the biggest highlights of this film for me was the music. Now, I am a big Michael Giacchino fan. I mentioned at the start of this video, I absolutely love Michael Giacchino. I love the work he's done in the past, and his resume is insane. When I heard he was coming onto this project, I was immediately excited. And I want to say about a year ago, I think it was at D23, they actually debuted the theme to this film. And again, that is not a common thing. You could tell that Marvel was like putting so much love and care and attention and focus into this movie, because to say, let's get the theme song written a whole year before the movie is out, shows that, like, hey, we want to get this right. We want to do the very best that we can with it. So yeah, about a year ago, it debuted at D23, and since then, I waited like an entire year before I could start listening to it on streaming, and since then I had to listen to it on like some crappy live version of it. But all that to say, I absolutely love the film score in this movie. Every scene just felt so fitting with the score. One of the final thoughts, just talking about the cast. You know, going into this, I started hearing more and more about the criticism of Pedro Pascal. Not to say that people like hate the guy, but I think because he's doing so much right now, people are like, I don't want to see another movie with Pedro Pascal. But to be honest with you guys, he was phenomenal in this movie. Vanessa Kirby was phenomenal. She definitely carries a lot of the emotion and weight of this movie. I feel like she definitely had the most weight on her character, and she delivered. She did an incredible job. Joseph Quinn, obviously, if you're a Stranger Things fan, you're coming into this, you know Joseph Quinn. He felt like he was like the underrated backbone of this whole thing. But last and not least, Ebon Moss-Backrack. He just recently got into The Bear, and I love The Bear. And ever since I watched The Bear, we binge watched like every season in like 2 weeks. It was insane. But ever since we watched The Bear, Cousin Richie is like one of my favorite characters in like all of TV. So that only brought up my excitement for this movie. And although he doesn't have a lot to do in the movie, the moments he's in, he really makes a big impact on. The final thoughts, Fantastic Four: First Steps was an incredible time. And I really think this is the boost that Marvel needs right now, especially with its multiverse saga. With the post-credit scenes, I'm not going to spoil them. But the first one, seeing what that's leading to, it's not very long, but it does give a very big implication to the future, and that it has been a missing factor in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I feel like recently there has been a lot of post-credit scenes with the multiverse saga that just been unanswered, have led to nowhere. But with this, this is one that was directed by the Russo brothers, who are directing Doomsday and Secret Wars, the upcoming Avengers films. And I really feel like we're starting to get more of a direction as to where everything is going. And even though it feels like we're in a period of Marvel fatigue, even though it feels like we're in a period of not knowing what the Marvel direction is, this film was so good that it helped propel and like almost fast track all of those concerns. Fantastic Four, First Steps. I had an incredible time with it. I'm not really much about rating, but it does mean a lot when I think to myself, do I want to go back and rewatch this? And I absolutely will. I am very interested to go back and see all the little Easter eggs and all the little references. And I think this is just it works so well on its own, but I feel like as time goes on, we will see more of its impact on the future of the MCU. So, again, thank you guys so much for checking out this video. This is a longer review than I normally do, but I'm just trying something new. Just essentially gonna upload this thing as is, very few edits, just see how it goes. But thank you guys so much. Are you excited for Fantastic Four First Steps? Has this been the superhero movie of the summer for you? Are you still into the Marvel Cinematic Universe? Do you feel like the Marvel fatigue is still a thing? Please let me know. Comment down below, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys next time.